VR has the potential to change reality forever, but there's been a huge barrier preventing it from mass adoption for years: VR cybersickness. It's fascinating to me that apparently up to 80% of people who put on a headset for the first time will experience this form of motion sickness, giving first-time users dizziness, nausea, fatigue, and even... Yeah, what a wonderful first impression. I've been in VR long enough to know this is extremely common, but hearing that 4 out of 5 people will have to deal with this is staggering to say the least. There's a ton of depth on what's actually going on inside your brain and body when using a headset, meaning most people have no clue that there's actually scientifically backed ways to help mitigate, prevent, or even train themselves out of VR cybersickness. As we explore this in detail, you'll see this video isn't written to just be analysis, but doubles as a guide for acclimating yourself or others that you're showing VR to for the very first time. So grab a bag and buckle in. Before we start, I'd like to shout out this video's sponsor, Xsolla. Along with many other YouTube content creators, I've been happily using the Xsolla partner payment platform for my affiliate payouts for years now, and recently I've been using their newly launched Xsolla Cash MasterCard, a virtual payment card for creators like myself to access their partner network earnings quickly and securely. By setting up an Xsolla Money account, you can transfer your payout funds directly to the card balance to use anywhere MasterCard is accepted. It kind of works like a prepaid card, but where you control the balance, and I've used it for purchases online and even with Tap to Pay in my Apple Wallet at the grocery store. Google Pay works too, of course, with zero friction whatsoever. XPN transfer withdrawals are as low as $10, and while only available to XPN creators in the US right now, it will be rolling out to other regions very soon. Personally, I read through all the policies when signing up to make sure that my money is safe, and honestly, I feel confident in recommending the card to other creators after trying it out for myself. You can sign up using my link below at the top of the description box, and thanks again, Xsolla. But now, back to the video. Let's start by explaining what VR cybersickness is and what's causing it. Virtual reality at its core is an illusion, designed to trick your brain into feeling that you're somewhere or something that you're not. Philosophically, this is incredibly groundbreaking and cool, but physiologically, it's extremely confusing for your body and can cause a mixture of intense physical and mental reactions, with cybersickness being a result of this mismatch. It's a type of visually induced motion sickness, VIMS, specifically resulting from exposure to digital screens. Symptoms range from headaches and mild discomfort to nausea, vertigo, and even vomiting. This has been happening for years before VR, uncommonly albeit, through everyday tech like TVs or computer monitors. But as it takes up only a small portion of your visual field, it's likely never to have been an issue for most of you. You have, however, likely experienced motion sickness in the physical realm before from situations like car rides or roller coasters. Essentially anything that triggers a mismatch in your brain's visual and vestibular systems. Normally this is induced more so by the body motion aspect, such as physically feeling the movement of a vehicle while your eyes struggle to match that information. But with VIMS, it's triggered by what your eyes are seeing in particular. You're likely standing on a perfectly stable floor while having a screen in your face that replaces your entire visual field, simulating motion that's not actually happening, which isn't the norm when it comes to typical motion sickness experiences. Susceptibility for motion sickness: women experience it more than men, children less than adults, and it's even been shown that genetics can predispose you to hypersensitivity to it. Condolences to all my Chinese friends out there. And some people just have really sensitive vestibular systems in general. Deep inside your inner ear, there's these little spiral canals, your otolith organs, that are filled with fluid. When your head moves around, these fluids get swashed around like a bucket of water, tangling some little tiny hairs in the canals. This system can detect your speed, direction, and gains balance from being aware of gravity itself. You can personally test the system out by spinning around in circles really fast, and you'll feel the pressure inside your ears and end up dizzy once you stop. because that fluid keeps on sloshing around, even though your eyes can tell that you're not actually moving anymore. And that mismatch is what makes your brain confused, which this alone could be enough to make some people feel sick. With VIMS, you're having the exact opposite experience. By standing still and using a joystick to move around in virtual reality, you are visibly seeing what your brain interprets as the physical world around you moving, but your inner ear fluid isn't actually being stimulated at all. In fact, you can do the exact opposite of the spinning test that I mentioned before by not moving your body around at all and just moving your joystick in place. This is what separates VIMS from regular motion sickness. These are very unfamiliar sensations for your body that can get super uncomfortable quick. So for VR cybersickness in particular, there are many layers of potential factors that can amplify this visual mismatch. And I mean a lot. Hardware, software, comfort, movement settings, or even just game mechanics themselves all play individual variable roles in how you perceive and react to virtual worlds. But there is a phenomenon that reliably works as a cure to VR cybersickness: VR endurance. But this cure is actually a bit controversial. While incredibly effective, it has the potential to be tedious, inconvenient, or even not worth it for most people. But before I totally dive into how VR endurance works, I do want to cover all the tangible factors that contribute to cybersickness in the first place. This video is intended to be as comprehensive as possible, so be prepared because we're going deep into this. Before getting into the more meaty hardware and software stuff, let's start with the basics. For those who know they're susceptible to motion sickness already, they can pre-treat symptoms with basic care solutions like Dramamine, ginger, chewing gum, wristbands, and avoiding large meals before play sessions. Lots of people online report that setting up a comfortable play space environment reduces their symptoms as well, such as having a fan blowing from one direction or placing a rug in the center of their play area. These tricks increase spatial orientation without needing to physically see the space around you, so taking the proper time to prepare the body and environment will help ease someone into this experience. When it comes to head-mounted displays, comfort matters way more than anyone thinks. VR headsets are wearable devices after all, no different than sunglasses or t-shirts. They're marketed in a one-size-fits-all fashion, but it's incredibly subjective technology, and what fits great on one person might not fit great on someone else. Thankfully, most headsets have multiple adjustment points, but first-time users don't always know how it's actually supposed to feel and won't be able to vocalize whether a headset is fitted correctly or not. But it should always be properly fitted before ever turning on the displays. This might even take multiple minutes to get right the first time, but a lot of people just skim this part and don't take it as seriously as they should. As for people who wear glasses, the glasses should be removed and not worn under the headset. They're not built to support that usually. Instead, opt for contact lenses or find custom prescription filters online that snap on over that particular headset's lenses. Once turned on, players should start with slow, controlled motion, ideally sitting down. Fast head rotations and movements can disorient a brain that's not adapted to VR yet. Movement speed can gradually be increased as the person becomes more aware of their sense of balance and orientation within physical space. But the first thing that should be adjusted once the headset is actually turned on is the interpupillary distance of the screens, IPD. IPD is measured in millimeters, and most people haven't ever gotten this measured at the optometrist before, but thankfully the majority of headsets out there have a slider that allows users to easily glide the IPD from a minimum distance to a maximum distance for exact adjustments. Newer headsets like the Quest 3 have a larger range to accommodate for more facial types, but slightly older ones like the Valve Index are more limited in this regard. IPD is incredibly important, even as a 1 to 2 millimeter offset from someone's correct IPD can cause immense discomfort, headaches, and sickness. I have a personal bone to pick with the Quest 2 and 3S IPD adjustment because they have only 3 set levels instead of just using sliders. My IPD is 60.5, putting it smack in the middle between their 58 and 63mm distances. Ironically, these are the two most affordable and popular headsets to ever be on market, meaning the majority of people will have their first VR experience on one of these, despite the chances of them having one of those 3 exact IPDs being fairly low. This is one of the reasons that I think the Quest 3 is worth a little bit of the extra money when I'm recommending people headsets, but you could kind of cheese the sliders in between a little bit, but it's not natural, and I can't imagine the majority of people will ever even think of doing this. Regardless of that tangent, the point is that every player should be prioritizing fine-tuning their IPD as much as possible before playing any games. Now we can get into the juicy, sciencey part of the hardware and software breakdowns. Based on the studies I found, latency is the biggest spec factor when it comes to causing cybersickness, particularly motion to photon latency, which describes the time difference between tracked movement and that movement actually being rendered on your display. This tends to be most obvious with wireless headsets, such as using Quest via PC Link, but to some degree is just a natural side effect of motion track technology in general. Humans can potentially notice visual delays of even just 10 to 20 milliseconds, so having as low latency as possible prevents any potential mismatches that could trigger cybersickness in the brain, which makes sense because moving your hand and having it lag slightly behind is pretty disorienting. Nowadays, this is less of an issue than ever, especially as hardware and software improves, which is where specs come into play. And the 2 key factors here are frame rate, how many images are being rendered on a display, and refresh rate, how often the display actually updates images. Ideally, we want these numbers to match, with 120 FPS reportedly being the quote sweet spot for reducing cybersickness. And while higher spec setups could potentially match both a 120 FPS and 120 Hz refresh rate, they most often don't, with frames typically lagging behind. Meaning VR operating systems need to artificially employ techniques to combat that latency from the mismatch. The main technique being asynchronous reprojection. Now, this topic is very complex. It could be an entire video on its own, but to summarize, it encapsulates various smoothing, frame extrapolating, and warping techniques. They're pretty easy equations to solve, but unfortunately very, very easy to unsolve, such as having a tendency to induce warping and visual artifacts, which of course can cause disorientation and sickness. Steam VR automatically turns on a feature called motion smoothing, which is one of these techniques that causes these common side effects. And anytime I install Steam VR, the first thing that I do is turn off motion smoothing, as it makes heavy performance games like VRChat unbearable. But not every operating system allows for control over reprojection techniques, such as PSVR 2. And I found a lot of people online reporting it as a major cause of their cybersickness in games that aren't capable of a full 90 FPS. Hilariously, PSVR 2 has one of the fastest latency times out there, so intuitively it should be great for cybersickness. But even this one missing feature when it comes to user control can make the experience not a good choice for first-time users. On the topic of PSVR 2, it's one of the newer and more expensive headsets using OLED displays, and while LCD also have this thing called black frame insertion, which isn't typically noticeable to the eye, OLEDs have much shorter insertions, meaning longer lit frames on the screen that causes more motion blur, resulting in, you guessed it, cybersickness. The solution to this is actually manually turning down screen brightness, which turns up the black frame insertion length, lowering perceived motion blur. My headset of choice is the Big Screen Beyond 2i, and when I go a while without using it, I have to turn the brightness down for a few sessions until my eyes get used to the displays again. This means that OLEDs are a better choice for advanced VR users than beginners, so on OLEDs, I can highly recommend that everyone start with the brightness is cranked down to around 25% and slowly build it back up again, which is especially important for first-time players. I do want to point out that users can find ways of having more control over the refresh rate and FPS amounts by exchanging the performance cost of another spec. This study reports that for resolution, 2K is the important threshold, so higher resolution headsets can be manually lowered as an exchange spec with no significant effect on cybersickness, rather just a reduction in overall player immersion. Typically, resolution can be decreased in operating system settings, but for Quest headsets, I recommend using external software like Quest Optimizer, which I showcased in my Quest must-haves video a few months ago, because it really allows for meticulous control over all three of these specs, and with the ability to let users test and immediately see how adjusting each one makes a difference in their quality of experience. Those are all the notable factors we know about, at least for now, when it comes to hardware and general software in VR headsets. But we have to talk about something that's equally as important: the games themselves, particularly Locomotion, aka your movement settings. Most games have Locomotion settings in their menu to enable features scientifically proven to help reduce cybersickness symptoms in players, especially new ones. Teleportation movement, also called holoport in games like VRChat, has been shown in studies to cause very little VR sickness. This function swaps out the need to move a character around a world with your joystick, which causes the illusion of motion in your virtual environment, and swaps it for intentionally placed teleportation points. The trade-off is that this method lowers perceived immersion of games massively, but while working up your VR endurance, it makes one of the most substantial differences in reducing the sickness feeling. When it comes to turning your body, there's two manual methods to do so. Smooth turning is usually considered as an advanced setting because the visible movement of the world sliding around you, which relates to the spinning symptoms we talked about earlier. While snap turning counters this problem by jumping through exact angled increments at a time. So instead of removing directional movement triggers like teleportation solves, it reduces rotational movement triggers. These settings pair together nicely, but the addition of vignette settings should make just as big of a difference, if not potentially more. A vignette essentially puts on a pair of virtual goggles for a brief time that blocks out the outer portions of the environment, reducing your field of view by a substantial amount. While yet again having a lower field of view decreases immersion, nothing decreases it objectively worse than getting sick, which this helps greatly with. I will plug something that I found while researching this video, because I found this paid application called OVR Locomotion Effect on Steam that allows you to add the ability to lower FOV in every VR application, even in ones that don't have the controls natively. It doesn't have a lot of reviews, but every review I have seen seems to support it being extremely effective for them. But regardless of any game's accessibility options for cybersickness, some games will have more intense gameplay than others that is just too much for beginners. Things like roller coaster sims or Boneworks, which is basically the roller coaster version of VR games, are just plainly too intense for a first-time experience. There's a reason that stationary games like Beat Saber are some of the most popular that exist out there. There is no locomotion to even be an issue in the first place, since you're standing completely still in place while things happen around you. So starting with easier games and experiences like this is a way better introduction to new users. That's it for the comfort and tech side of cybersickness, which means we can finally dive into VR endurance, which is building up a tolerance against cybersickness over time through repeated exposure. Colloquially, we call this getting your VR legs. And there's scientific studies that show you exactly the best way to do just this, starting with sensory conflict theory. This study from the late 1970s on motion sickness adaptation evaluated the neural conflicts that provoke it. Here, participants were quite literally able to cure their motion sickness symptoms through continued exposure over time. What sensory conflict theory assumes is that this is a process similar to sensory motor learning. And you've most definitely experienced this before if you've ever tried to learn how to ride a bicycle or play an instrument. Fast forward to 2024, and scientists decided to put exactly this to the test for VR in particular, having participants with cybersickness do 20-minute sessions for 4 days in a row. For the first 3 days, they used a vignette, which, as we know, increases usability, and on the final day, they removed it, and compared symptoms to people who had only done a single VR session without any FOV restriction at all. What they found was a massive increase in VR endurance, and that even just playing for 15 minutes a day across 2 days can lead to a cybersickness reduction by 35 to 40%, which is very significant. A few months later, another study expanded upon this by trying timed intervals between sessions on the same day. And their conclusion is that taking short breaks will actually make symptoms worse. Playing after a full recovery leads symptoms to be the same, but that adding even just an extra 20 minutes of rest period after the full recovery does show an increase in endurance already. And to elaborate on the importance of session length, I've encountered a lot of people with the misconception that playing through symptoms is the fastest way to build VR endurance. But this could actually be Pavlov conditioning themselves into associating VR with pain, obviously making things worse. And while there's not scientific studies on this exact topic, there are adjacent studies that show this sort of thing does happen in similar scenarios. This one in particular studied how chemo patients anticipating the nausea from their cytotoxic drugs will literally condition themselves into having a reaction before the drugs are ever administered out of pure anticipation alone. And from observation, this seems to be true when it comes to VR, though I would love to see some studies covering this exact topic in more scientific depth. So now we know that having short, manageable play sessions over the course of daily intervals is a surefire way of training someone out of cybersickness. However, there's still a catch to this working, because building endurance over sessions is game specific. This study found that players who did a climbing game on their first day and did a roller coaster on the second didn't show any symptom improvements like we would expect. But those who had played the same game on both days did show the reduction, which at least to me makes sense. It's kind of like learning how to play piano and then thinking you can play guitar well because they're both instruments. As we know, gameplay varies drastically between all VR experiences. And that's basically as far as my own findings go. I'm not a scientist by any means, but I think that piecing together all this information is really interesting and very relevant for anybody interested in the future of technology. I can only imagine the millions of lost enthusiasts who gave up on the potential of virtual reality because of their negative first experience. The people whose IPDs didn't match their friends' Quest 2. The people who threw up while spinning to shoot zombies at an arcade. And the unknowable number of headsets sitting on dusty shelves because their owners didn't know the right way to get their VR legs. The real solution to this all doesn't come from expecting every single person to train themselves against cybersickness. As much as I'm confident in the endurance building approach, it's not convenient and doesn't apply to every situation, as not everyone will have continued access to a headset after their first session. Instead, I think the solution is encouraging hardware and software developers to continue prioritizing methods of acclimating first-time users into their headsets and experiences, as it's the most important way to keep bringing new people in to experience what they're making. There's some games that do a great job at this, while others expect the user to have knowledge they just won't. Some headsets are as customizable as possible for comfort, but others intentionally paywall cheap features like RPD adjustment sliders. But regardless of what happens in the short term, we do know that VR natives are a real phenomenon. There's an entire generation of Quest kids growing up with the headsets, and they make up the mass majority of VR users. Their brains are still plastic, they're less susceptible, and they're handling VR physically better than any of us adults. And long term, Gen Alpha and the generations after them are growing alongside this technology and are who companies like Meta are really banking on. We should keep pushing hard on this now, but Yeah, that's our actual future. And I hope that in some kind of way, this video can help spur conversation about why addressing cybersickness matters so much and help bring lost VR enthusiasts back to the tech that they gave up on. If you know someone who's experienced VR cybersickness, send them this video and save it to show friends you're planning on giving sessions to before their first time to help them prepare. If you found this video interesting, comment below your thoughts and give it a like. And of course, subscribe to the Virtual Reality Show channel for more videos just like this. If you're interested in finding a fun and welcoming VRChat community, consider joining our daily TVRS Hangouts inside our VRChat group, and check out our weekly schedules on my Discord, both are linked below. And consider joining my Patreon if you want to help continue videos like these. Special thanks to this month's Patreons, including virtual VIPs, In, and Sally.